Welcome back to the Iron Sights Podcast. I got a special guest today. Made a little drive in from the NorCal area. His name's Mac Rollins. He's also known as the Zen Cop. And you're going to learn all about him today. And I got tons of questions for you, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, man. I got acquainted with you quite some time ago. We kind of made a connection through Instagram. Mm-hmm. And then from the time we're recording this, it was probably close to 2.5, maybe 3 weeks ago. I heard you did an episode with Eric Tung from Blue Grit Radio, Blue Grit Wellness. And also on that show was a guy that goes by his Instagram handle is Survive Policing. Mm-hmm. And you guys got into some subject matter that I had actually already talked to Eric about on a previous podcast that he hadn't released yet. And I was like, oh man, I got to get into this because he put out a teaser on it that was like, oh, we're talking about identity here. And this is interesting because some of the conversations I've been having that have been revolving more about like police training, culture, kind of where we are in space and time. And then even particularly here in California, which we've kind of already covered that. I was like, man, I would really like to dig into a few things here. And this is what I was saying to you off air. And that is, I think you do an awesome job at the delivery of your message, which we're going to talk about, and particularly with getting into some of the nuanced stuff. A lot of times when I see people putting out messages, they're trying to kind of give like a black and white or like a debrief on something, and this is how this should have been handled, or this is how this could have been handled. Maybe this was handled well, maybe this was handled poorly. But I think what you do a really good job of is bringing in all these other things that maybe people don't really think about. When it comes to things like mindset, where you are from a fitness capacity. And I mean that not just in the sense that I think like physical fitness most people would think about, but more from a mental and an emotional perspective. So we're going to talk about a few things today. I got lots of questions for you, but maybe we just start with talking about you, kind of your background, where you're coming from, and then we can kind of dig into the Zen Cop blog and podcast and the project that you've been working on for quite some time, how you got there. So I say this to everybody, you can start and finish wherever you want. Cool. You just have to be patient with me because I may time you out to get some clarity on stuff. So ready, set, go, man.
Yeah. I grew up, I'm a lifelong resident of California. I grew up, actually I was born in San Jose. We moved out to Sacramento when I was around 5, but we spent a significant time out here. Still have lots of family out here, so it's not totally foreign to me.
Got it.
My youth was, pretty much music and skateboarding, among other things. But I've been a cop for 14 years. I'm married with 2 kids. And what really sort of created this movement or mission of mine was my own experience in 2020 with a mental health issue that sort of spearheaded all this, like we talked about off air. But excited to be here and excited for the conversation. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, you're welcome. And again, in case I haven't done this publicly, thanks for making the drive down today, and making time for me.
Absolutely,
I'm honored to have you here, and I try not to overdo this, but I really appreciate when people take time out of their day to just have the conversations. And you're very good at that. And I said this to you off air as well. You're a type of guy that doesn't need to prep for these kinds of conversations because you're very well put together. And this is not going back to your mission. This is not something that just happens, right? This is something that takes a lot of work and a lot of dedication. And when I hear you speak and when I see you writing and those things, it's clear to me that there's a deeper thought process going on there. And those are the kind of conversations I want to have. I want to get into the weeds on some stuff. So just maybe going back to the career a little bit, 14 years, you're not a spring chicken. You've done this a while. You've seen a few things because you know a few things because you've seen a few things as they say. Maybe just talk a little bit about kind of some of those experiences on the department, things that you've done.
Yeah, I started with a police department, lateral to a sheriff's office, which is where I am now. Mm-hmm. And that was in 2013. Worked patrol, did a couple specialty assignment stuff, worked on the homeless outreach team, which was an interesting experience. And then in 2018, got picked up for detectives, and I've been there ever since. I worked general, and my current assignment is child abuse, trafficking, and sex abuse. So it's a kind of a combination of 3 things in one, but it's a good gig. Probably the most rewarding assignment I've ever had, even though it's stressful and demanding, but I really enjoy what I do.
So a couple of things there. First off, the homeless outreach team, we got to talk about that, particularly here in California, particularly. over the last few years.
Yeah.
When were you on that assignment? Like how long ago?
That was probably, I'm probably 6 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So things were really starting to ramp up. They were really starting to ramp up here. And I'm interested, was there even a homeless outreach team before, or was that a new thing?
It was a new thing. So we started to see it in most of the bigger agencies, and then usually it just starts happening everywhere. Geographically, it kind of depends on where you are, what county you're in, and then also more importantly, what elected officials are either supporting or not supporting your movement or cause. So we had a mild homeless issue. I wouldn't say it was anything crazy compared to our neighbors, which is Sacramento, which is a huge homeless issue right now. Still is today, not as bad, just different. I think that there's a lot we can see that hasn't happened over the past however many years, where we see this ongoing issue and not a lot of, I guess, what I would call like action. More so just we're going to put a Band-Aid on it and hope it goes away. The biggest issue being narcotics, which, I mean, people can make the argument all day long, but I would say that less of a mental health issue, more of a narcotic issue. And most of the mental health stuff is going to be tied to some type of psychosis from drug use. So very seldom do you have an isolated mental health problem. It's actually a very small percentage of the homeless population that has a mental health issue with no narcotic background. And when you combine those two, that's why we have the problem today.
No doubt. The psychiatric crisis and obviously the drug crisis, you just mentioned, obviously they're highly intertwined. I just wonder about that title, homeless outreach. Okay, so there's the title, but what is that actual job? Like, what are you doing?
City and county dependent for sure. So dispositional by what you're trying to do. So the HOT is the acronym. We chose that name because it was the most common. There were other acronyms out there that just...
You guys love your acronyms.
Yeah. And so rather than try and reinvent the wheel, we just kept it. And me and another deputy at the time got tasked with creating this program, seeing if it'll go through. It's still active today. We did kind of the opposite. So a lot of people were... I don't know people, but a lot of agencies were just trying to sort of create a unit that would go out and politely move people from one side to another, which doesn't solve anything. So with our numbers and our ability to focus on individuals one at a time versus kind of a mass thing. So very quickly I learned, I started to keep stats. So I started to look at, what made them homeless and their circumstances before they were homeless. Most of them were actually adopted, which was a very strange, consistent theme. And usually they were men, and usually some type of drug use before. So it was a substance abuse issue combined with a social issue. And some of them, a lot of people say, well, just get your shit together, do that. It's not that simple. Some of these people were dealt a really bad hand from birth. And whether that was, they were born a drug baby or they were born in circumstances that they couldn't prevent, that ultimately led to a sustained life of usually, being incarcerated or some type of just not a normal, quote unquote, normal upbringing that most people are used to. So once we started to tackle, I guess, the root issues, you could move into the conversation about sobriety. And sobriety is a very difficult conversation to have when it involves opioids, which is kind of where we are now. Still there because of fentanyl. But even, back then, when I first became a cop, heroin was very rare. You didn't see it a lot of meth, but it was very rare to actually find heroin. Now, maybe years ago, heroin became super abundant. It was cheap. It was abundant in anywhere.
And highly addictive.
Very, yeah. And the high was different. So as weird as it sounds, like you were more productive as a homeless individual on meth than you were on an opioid. Why that matters is because of motivation and movement and, the opioid crisis, which is now, sort of bled over in the normal society, which is unfortunate. It shouldn't have to bleed over to get a reaction, but...
it shouldn't matter, but it does.
It does. And when certain people start dying, it's not just, the general, just homeless population. It starts happening to kids. That's when it usually grabs the attention. But we sort of had this mentality that was different where it was, sobriety, personal success in sobriety, and then housing. Because you can move a drug addict into a facility of some kind. The likelihood of them staying or committing is really slim without the proper, it's like building a house without foundation.
Right.
So our approach was really focused on, the mindset, the sobriety, and then moving forward. And the success rates that we saw were pretty good. It comes in waves. Homeless, just like anything else, homelessness is generational. So you do have a new group that's, not going to be as motivated. But the bottom line is that, if someone wants to, and this is, some people would disagree with this, but it's true. It comes down to when they want to change. And just like anything else, if you chew tobacco, if you smoke cigarettes, whatever it is, if you really want to quit, you will. If you don't, then you won't.
Right.
And as long as they were ready, which could be a window of only a few days, right? And we tried not to pair that window with, I'm getting arrested right now, or something to where, and I'll even touch on that real quick, is incarceration a means to ending the homeless issue? No, but it does create sobriety. Mm-hmm. So we did see some success in individuals who were incarcerated for 6 months, a year. And within that year, they get sober, they get the mindset right. And then from like a door-to-door transfer, you'd move them from the jail to Delancey Street or another facility where they could be successful. But, I'd be lying if I said the numbers were great, because they weren't. But if we're helping one person, it's worth it. And coming from a background with family who's experienced homelessness, I can 100% say that it's worth it, because everyone starts somewhere. So it's not always just this, generic, bum sleeping on the sidewalk with a bottle of liquor. It's way deeper than that.
So I found this interesting that the police agency, the law enforcement agency, was charged with doing this, because to me this sounds much more like something else.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem, is it's been put in all these different places, and it's been somebody's problem to take care of. How did that happen? And what was the motivation for that?
I think the bottom line is, regardless of who handles the situation afterward, cops are, and I'm not saying that, so the first responder in itself, like, I'm not knocking the fire guys, but 99% of the time, the cops are going to be there first, right?
Right.
The firefighters are not proactive. They're
reactive.
On call, they go.
Yep.
So with law enforcement, for most of the calls that you would go to that involve these people, we were the first point of contact.
Okay.
And then it would go through channels or whatever the case may be, the Health and Human Services or whatever, which became, challenging. But at the same time, we started to see the benefits of maybe incorporating both. So a lot of these people who worked for Health and Human Services didn't understand the totality of what we were dealing with. So we actually started doing ride-alongs, and we didn't trademark this. There's a lot of other agencies, and we traveled a lot. When we started this unit, we went to SAC, we went to the Bay Area, a bunch of different agencies to sort of see, what'd you guys do, what worked, what didn't work. But the biggest thing they saw was exposing the people behind the scenes to the scene itself. Here's what we're dealing with, and bringing them out to the camps. And, some of them cried, some of them had no idea the sights, the smells that come with
surprised by this. Yeah.
And so we said, look, this is why they didn't make it on Monday. It's not because they didn't have a car. It's because the bus took X, Y, just pick your reason. Even the guys who were really motivated, it was very difficult for them to negotiate this, new, to us, it's simple. Be here at 9 a.m. Monday. Cool. But for them, that would be very difficult. And sometimes they couldn't do it, or for whatever reason couldn't make it. So yeah, we started to incorporate those, sort of other entities within the county so that everyone was on the same page. And that's where you see a lot of multidisciplinary teams. You see a lot of people coming together. And oddly enough, we're going to have a lot of good info. And usually the info is pretty direct and pretty raw. And for the lady, or guy at Health and Human Services who has a completely different mindset, thinking that, we just give them blankets and canned food, everything will be okay. And it's not going to do anything.
Right. So I'm wondering, as you're going through this experience, that actually, I'm really glad I don't think I knew that about you. So I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm wondering what skills you're learning and picking up while doing that kind of work as an officer, and how that carries forward for you.
I don't know. Part of the reason why, well, I should say I was on weekend graveyard for a long time. So I got to know a lot of those people just from working, and whether it was just talking to them or arresting them, it just happened.
Quote unquote repeat offenders or whatever.
And it was like clockwork, and that was just kind of how the job works. You work in the same area for any number of time, you're going to learn, you're going to deal with the same people over and over again. So I already had a relationship with a lot of them, some good, some bad. So it was kind of weird to go, hey, I'm going to help you. And they're like, fuck you.
Right.
Who are you?
Right.
But the relationship wasn't, I would say it was mostly good. And that's just from having communication skills and being able to talk to people. And we were kind of selected at random. I don't really know how we came together as a team. And then we got a sergeant, and the next thing we knew, we're off and running. And there were so many things that started to rabbit hole because of it. But I guess to answer your question, I really just, I've always been able to talk to people, and that's a skill set that goes beyond law enforcement. I've been that way my whole life, just very, it's odd because I don't talk a lot, and I'm actually pretty quiet and stoic, but once you get to know me, I'm very social, and at work, I'm really social too. Drives my wife nuts actually, because everywhere we go, I'll just talk to people. And I just like doing that because it's just what we should do. You should be able to say hello to someone and
I agree.
Have a conversation. So that was easy for me. And then empathy and sympathy are two very different things. So you can be empathetic and you can try and motivate people. But I also learned pretty quickly that, what they didn't have that most of us did is some type of stable family structure. So usually along with the adoption and the drug use stuff, most of these people didn't have a dad, which is a pretty significant, if you look at family dynamic, I mean, just from my own experiences, instant family, just add dad. When dad wasn't a part of that dynamic, it was a different household. So for the first time, I think a lot of these guys and gals were being held accountable. And so in a weird way, it was kind of like talking to your kids sometimes, where you'd be like, this is not okay. We got to fix this. And eventually, we were kind of like, Bible salesmen. We'll just keep showing up until you finally do something. And, accountability is a big part of it. But having patience would be huge, because I don't think there's very many people. I'm not saying that I'm something special, but not everyone could do that every day. And it comes with a time limit. I mean, I was done when I left and got picked up for detectives. I was done with homeless shit.
I can't imagine.
Take it.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, again, just going back to how does this wind up in a police officer's scope of work, and not just scope of work. Sorry, that's not the right term, because it is in the scope of work.
It is, but it isn't.
But it isn't. Yeah. But that's the fact that is the focused scope of work is interesting to me. I had not heard that before. We did see for a time there where there was a movement to try and take healthcare professionals and put them in the field to be quote unquote first responders, first on scene. And we saw that didn't work out too well. And you just described probably why it didn't. Yeah. And that was they had no idea what was really going on
some
out
of them
there.
got killed.
Yeah.
Not good.
Obviously, very bad outcomes there. And I don't know where that got left. It was very popular for a while, but do you have any idea?
No, it comes in waves. I mean, I've been out of that game for a while, but I think right now we're in a weird spot, because we have, I think, so many people, when you have a problem, you should have an end game. The end game, if you look at policing, well, the end game's crime. Cool. We're never going to stop that, right? I think we'd all agree that no matter what happens, it's going to be here. Homelessness, since we've been able to create a structure to live in, we've had homeless people. We've had someone in the family who goes, I don't want to do that, or whatever the case may be, and they end up on the outs. And that's been the case for as long as we can remember. How big it gets is kind of up to the county or the city and what they choose to do. So you'll hear me say this a lot on the show today, is that this is specific to where we live, right? Things could be different if you drive 100 miles in a different direction. You may have a county that has a different ordinance where you can't have, tents on the sidewalk or whatever the case may be. And that's going to differ from city to county and to state. So California in particular, if you look at, it's not necessarily based on populace. It is, but it isn't. But within those, cities, what is being allowed versus what is not being allowed is going to probably dictate where people choose to migrate.
Where do they go?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, where they go. I mean, we saw that here in San Jose, and and just really in this last probably 6 to 8 months, there's really been a concerted effort to actually try and handle the problem instead of just moving the problem around. But what we saw was a huge influx of people back during that period of, let's say, 20 to 22, as maybe some of these counties and cities, because we're in the South Bay, right? There's not much south of us for a ways, right? So this is kind of the last stopping point, unless you want to make a trip, and you got to go a long ways from here. But you got the Bay in the middle, and then you got everything up the peninsula and everything up the East Bay. And so if you go up the peninsula, what's going on in the peninsula is very much different than what's going on in the East Bay. As you start at the Southeast Bay and you start to work up to the Northeast Bay. And so we did see a huge amount of migration. The other part that happened with that is we have a transportation system. Here we have the Caltrain that runs basically from us. It starts a little further south of us and it goes right up into the middle to the heart of San Francisco. And you can stop anywhere along the way, obviously. And what we saw cities and counties doing was literally handing people train tickets. Voucher to get on. You can go somewhere, but you can't stay here. And we're just putting them on literally on the train and moving the problem someplace else. And during COVID, as an example, being down here in Techville and Tech Central, so many people moved out of the area, which kind of made it quiet, right? And also we were getting maybe a little less attention. It sort of invited that migration in, and it created obviously huge problems. And we're not the only place. It's not isolated to San Jose or the Bay Area. I mean, we're just mentioning this, but what is interesting to me, going back to what you're saying, is you're talking about those that are going to commit crime versus those who somehow wind themselves up in a homeless situation. California, to my knowledge, now has the largest homeless population in the entire United States. The last stats I saw is San Jose actually is 4th on the list. The city of San Jose is 4th on the list in the entire country in terms of homeless population. So stats set aside, and again, some of those things may have changed since the last report that I saw. The point of this is it seems to be growing. It seems to be centralized now in a lot of different areas. And the fact of the matter is what we've done is just kind of move things around. I think there's some things that precipitated this, and we can maybe get into that later because we've just kind of gone into a rabbit hole here. But I think it's interesting for law enforcement to be having to deal with that situation versus what they're called to do on so much of the rest of the job and what they're expected to know how to do and expected how to handle things, and whether or not they're getting training for this or not. But I'm certain, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm certain the amount of training you got dealt maybe as a young officer, even in the academy and then coming out, didn't prepare you for what you're currently faced with now on the streets with homelessness, drug addiction, and psychosis. Correct or incorrect?
No, I mean, the academy is survival. That's kind of like the main thing is you got case law, you got how to not die and how to not get sued and all these good things. The other stuff is kind of just learn as you go and
hope for the best.
I mean, there's only so much you can cram into an academy, which is why I really hammer on life experience before you become a cop. Like it's a weird thing to say. I was fortunate enough to experience so many horrible things before I became a cop that it definitely, when I was 25, I may as well have been 40. I'd experienced so much throughout my childhood and even in my young adulthood where I just sort of, and I had a kid on the way. I mean, it was just all of this shit at one time. So it made me grow up very quickly. I'm fortunate to have those experiences, but you can't really substitute. It just either happens or it doesn't.
And you can't expect people to come into the job or the profession having had that stuff. And you hope that they don't at some level, but at the same time, you're just talking about how valuable it was in terms of being able to do the things that need to be done out there, particularly now. I want to change gears here a little bit. So, because this will cut that, all the things you just talked about will kind of set up kind of the rest of this. So you mentioned you're currently working a detective role and you're in, you said sex crimes, child abuse, and trafficking.
Yeah, we do a little bit of trafficking, not that much.
Holy cow, man. I mean, that's a whole other thing. Right? I mean, that's a whole other thing. And I can't imagine the things that you're seeing and having to deal with there. You said it's very rewarding. So rather than talk about the negative, I want to talk about the rewarding part. What's the good stuff?
Sadly, I mean, the negative outweighs it, but the good stuff, I mean, if you really, to think that so I'll start by saying this. When I first became a cop, I knew that evil existed and I knew that all this stuff was real. I wasn't the kid that wanted to be a cop my entire life. I wanted to do something in public service. I knew that from a young age, but no interest in the fire department. Just kind of didn't hate cops when I was younger, but growing up skateboarding, it wasn't
didn't have a great relationship.
But a lot of them were cool. Like where I grew up, they were always pretty chill. But never really thought I'd be interested in that. So when I first got into it, and then I started to see there's two different types of I guess what I would call evil out there. And the first group is you're just sort of bad guys. You're run-of-the-mill burglars or guys that are reliant on an opportunity. So 9 times out of 10, it's got drugs involved, right? They're trying to maintain drug use. They're trying by any means necessary, right? If you look at most of the property crimes, it's the margins are. I mean, to us, it's not a surprise, but most of it is based on dope use, on narcotics, and just wanting to buy narcotics and stay high. It's an addiction issue.
That's the motivator.
And most of those people, guys and gals, they will, when in a sober state, they genuinely feel bad, and you'll interview them when they're not high, they're not full of shit. I didn't really think about that. Like, well, you broke into this person's home, and you stole. Whatever you stole. And to them, it's like, well, it's just stuff. Well, no, you just terrorize that person. So now they're not going to sleep normal for years. That's just the average person, right? I think you and I have a different mindset when we go to bed at night. Right. It might happen, it might not. But most people just go to bed and they don't even think about that. So now that they victimized this person, they see the results. Most of them do feel terrible. Like, oh, man, I didn't really think about it. Oh, my God. And the more they get to, a sober mindset and out of that element, they genuinely will turn their life around. Now, the other group that is different, when, someone, goes to the ATM machine and pulls a gun on you, they take your money, that's their gain. They get money, they can go buy dope, they can go do whatever. There's a something they take away from that. Evil, you're rapists, you're murderers, but not for gain, just because that's a whole nother group where the takeaway isn't physical, it's mental. So it either makes them feel good, whether it's sexual arousal or it's internal or the chemical release from the brain, whatever it is, but it makes them feel better. That's a whole nother group. And I worked with that group a little bit over the years and, with certain things, but I didn't really dive into. From a patrol level, I'd take the report for the child molester or whatever. But when you get into the detective capacity, you talk to these people for hours and you really dive into the inside of their brain, and you learn that this is a whole new level of just insidious, just you can't even imagine. And that, I think, is the most rewarding part, knowing that I've put people away for a very long time. Got it. I have some cases right now that are going to be life cases, which is incredible to think about. And, some people, oh, well, no, there's no.
I'm with you.
Once you see it and you hear it and you see all of these things that happen, we can't fix this person. We can't rehabilitate them. They don't need to be a part of society because they're never going to contribute anything positive. Even if the one thing they do is the one thing, we can't take that away. So that's the most rewarding is seeing the victims kind of become set free and seeing them move forward and the true, like the evilest portions of society being held accountable. And, I make fun of California all the time, but it's one of the few states that still takes sex crimes very seriously and to a degree that will more times than not, depending on the age of the victim, result in the life case. So that's the reward. The other half is just terrible. Victim management and failure. And it's not necessarily even failure to like, oh, I fucked this up, but we all knew that it was going to be this way. And the victim is saying, I want this, I want that. And you're like, I get it, but it's not going to happen. And the DA is going to try really hard, but at the end of the day, he's going to look at 7 years. And even though you did everything right, that person will still motherfuck you till the day you die. Yeah. The cops didn't do enough. And you'll hear that a lot. The cops didn't do. And the reality is, no, the cops did. It just, the system didn't work out for this particular scenario.
Yeah, I guess there's no way around that. That just gets the reality of the situation, right? Yeah. But I find it's interesting. I can't imagine, but I think I can try and imagine the victory that exists there when it does go the right way, when the justice system, gets it right, the victim gets what they can get out of it or what they should be getting out of it, like a life sentence. This person is not getting out, right? Like, I don't have to worry about this anymore. It doesn't take what happened away, but there is some level of maybe peace that can be found there. I don't know.
A lot of vindication for victims and all that.
Yep. Yeah, so that's interesting. Everything you've talked about right now just speaks so much, has filled in so many gaps for me on kind of how I hear you speak and the things I hear you speaking about. So I want to move into the passion project and the mission that you've been on with regard to the Zen Cop business, right? It's interesting. I think when people think the term Zen can mean different things to different people, but I wondered why you picked that.
I picked it because I reference my mom a lot, my childhood, and just the things that she taught me when I was younger that I didn't take much stock in until I was older. My mom was really into Eastern medicine and yoga, reflexology, and all this stuff and meditation. I just didn't really have maybe a need for it, or I didn't understand it, but I also wasn't put into a scenario where I had to respect it.
Yeah.
So that was part of the reason. There's multiple definitions that we could go into, but I kind of just chose it because it was important to me, and it was a name and something I could roll with.
I got you. And there's a connection to it. I think I get that. So maybe just talk a little bit about the inception of this and how it got started and what you've been doing with it.
So in 2020, on July 11th, I thought I had a heart attack, and it was this really just sort of horrible experience. I've had all these really neat experiences at work, whether it was scary or, my life was in danger, all this stuff. And this was without question the scariest day of my life. And I have yet to find a day that was similar to that in terms of how it made me feel. So I go to the doctor, go to the emergency room, and it was this whole to-do. I thought for sure I was having a heart attack. The EKG's out normal, go to the big hospital, and they do all these tests, and hours later, they're like, yeah, you're good. No heart attack. And I was like, okay. Well, what does that mean? They're like, I don't know, but you're not dying today. So follow up.
We've done our job at the ER.
And it's frustrating, but that's emergency medicine. Okay, you're not having a heart attack. Well, we don't know what it is, but you're still alive. Go home. And so we were leaving for a trip the next day, going to Joshua Tree, California, which is a far drive. So the trip wasn't ruined, but I didn't have a good time. I just was like, what happened to me? There's still no answers. So that incident happened 2 more times. The third time it happened, they're all different doctors. The doctor finally comes out and he's like, hey, have you ever had a panic attack before? And I said, no, I don't know what that is. I don't panic. And he's like, what do you do for work? I said, I'm a cop. He's like, well, that's strike one. So let's talk. And we did. It was like, I started doing all this research, and just, it's the same symptoms. As a
heart attack. Yeah.
And so I had a really hard time putting that together.
So heart fluttering, so heart rate goes up.
Yeah, heart rate, chest pain, it just is the most intense thing ever. I really don't know how to describe it other than absolutely terrifying. It was a horrible way to feel, and mostly because I couldn't control anything. So
it's gonna be a tough time for dudes like you to do what you do.
Yeah, you're just like, how do I fix this? Well, I can't. And to not be in control is a very scary scenario. And at the time, I was drinking a lot. I wasn't managing my stress well. I thought I was, but the human body has a really interesting way of introducing that to you. And I think I look back on that day, at the time I was upset, but I wouldn't change anything. It opened up a whole new lifestyle, all of it just sort of went. But I had a couple of years to work. If you had told me that this would take years, I probably would have killed myself, because I just said, fuck no, there's no way. And I'm better than I was, but there's good days, bad days, and everything in between. But one of the more prominent experiences was where I don't know what it was, but to this day, I'll still call it a suicidal ideation, where I just was totally, I was in the car, excuse me, and just very freaked out that there was a gun on my hip, and I was going to training at work. It was the weirdest feeling. The words, and I've talked about it before on a different podcast, where it was just gross, yucky, rotten, this really just nasty feeling of just something else being in my head, and I didn't like it.
Like doom?
Yeah, very.
Okay.
And so I remember going, I'll just put my gun in the trunk, but I was so afraid to even touch my gun that I was just okay, just let it go. And went to training, came back, and I didn't tell anyone about that because I was scared to bring it up. And in cop world, it's
a red flag, man.
Well, I think of am I going to lose I'm a gun enthusiast. I like to hunt. I like to shoot. All these things that sort of, tie into my career? Am I going to lose all these things? Am I going to lose my job? And I think there's a lot of people, not necessarily just cops, but if you're in a career field that involves, you might lose something if you come forward and say something, which is not true, but that's what we think. So that was kind of like my big aha moment. And then in the months following, they did tons of tests, all this stuff where it was just...
They're trying to rule out the physiological stuff.
Exactly.
Of,
everything.
People would relate this to that you could put your finger on it and go, take this pill or do this.
And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to take any medication. It really didn't sit well with me. I'm very much, I shouldn't say against it, but before you commit to something that's a fix, it's like you need to, even at the time, like knowing that was an option, I was just like, no, I don't want to do that yet. I don't want to, not that it's self-medicating, but it is. I wasn't ready to cross that bridge.
What are my options here?
Yeah. So I really started to work on myself. I started to exercise frequently and consistent. The key word is consistency. So and then all of a sudden I had all this stuff that I had to do, and it wasn't hard, but it was time consuming. And in a job where you're already working all the time, it's very difficult to introduce things to, make your life better. And I just started doing small, reasonable things. And then the next thing I knew, I was committed to meditation. I had all these things that were slowly working because they made me feel better. And as time went on, it wasn't easy, which is when I started writing a lot. And that's kind of what turned into a blog, which turned into the podcast. And here we are now. But writing is an outlet for me and was a big outlet for me. There's tons of stuff that I've written that I haven't shared that I'll just sort of throw out at random. But that was a huge recovery process for me, was learning how to write things down, talking about, like, we could talk about this. If I wrote you a story about this, it'd probably be 50 pages. We're going to talk about it for 5 minutes. But when you write things down, you make yourself a lot more vulnerable and you'll be more honest. It's the same thing if you were having a fight with your wife or girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever. A text message might be more constructive than a phone call, or even writing them a letter. It's harder to do, but you'll probably say a lot more writing things down. You'll be more honest. So that was a big part of that.
So I got a question. Time out for a second. So did this just start with this process and it was just for you? It was like journaling?
Oh yeah, it was just for me. I was doing it. I actually started writing a book, which is a long story.
Were you coached to do this, or was this just something that you felt compelled to do? You read about it somewhere and you thought maybe I should try this? How does that even come up?
I started going to therapy, which for anyone who's listening, you don't have to. Anyone could go to therapy and have something to talk about. So if you say, I don't need therapy, you're probably the person who needs it the most. And I wasn't against it. I just didn't know that I needed it. And so I started going, and I'll just sort of throw this out there as like a disclaimer for therapy. You're not going to go for a month or two and feel great. You have to go to what your body needs. And I'll say that a lot today. Everyone's different. So I can't just give you tools to go forth and conquer. You can listen to podcasts. You can find all these, guys and gals who have all these really cool, things to talk about online. It may not work for you. Some of the most prominent figures on social media, that's really cool that you can wake up at 3 a.m. and do all this stuff throughout the day. And, he's a big one. And there's a lot, I read a bunch of his books. He's a very articulate man, but I can't relate to that lifestyle. So find something that you can relate to that's doable for you, and don't chase things that are going to be out of your realm, because you'll fail. You'll fail very quickly. So that was for me. I found that spending time alone, which was hard because I had a family, I still have a family, but at the time I felt like I was, being a bad dad.
Selfish.
And fortunately I have a very, very amazing wife who would just tell me, just do what you have to do, whatever you have to do. And so me sort of finding a way to be better, you have to be selfish. And I'll tell people that all the time. You're going to do your family a disservice if you're not making yourself a priority, because you're going to be a subpar version of what you could be. It kind of happened naturally. The writing stuff just I think it just happened on its own, but going to therapy sort of opened up a whole new, whether it was, EMDR, brain spotting. We can talk about that a little bit for those who don't know, but took me a while to kind of dive into that and see if it worked. But for EMDR, I can't remember that acronym, but the way I would describe it is it exercises two parts of your brain simultaneously while you're holding these like vibrating balls. And what it does is it doesn't get rid of the memory. It takes something that your body had a traumatic response to, and it takes it from like an iPhone 20,
It reframes
100, turns it into a Polaroid, is what I say. And so now you have that memory, but the grittiness, the smells, the sight, the details are sort of subdued. So it kind of or you find a connection as to why it was important to you, which is a whole nother conversation. But brain spotting was the same way. But you can't just show up to therapy and hope to get your black belt in 6 months. It doesn't work.
Yeah, there's another piece of this, and I hear a lot of this talk in the space. And when I say the space, law enforcement, also actually higher levels, first responders in therapy, and there's stigma attached to it.
Sure.
I think you just mentioned it, like there shouldn't be, but there is. And part of it, I think, is to blame on both sides. One being again, this is not to take a shot at first responders, just that they're going and expecting an answer, and then maybe they find their answer in that therapy somehow, in some way. And you just mentioned a lot of things that people may not know about EMDR, brain spotting. Those are techniques, right? Those are tools that can be used in this process, and you have to find the right matchup. Like, first off, if you're I have a little bit of experience with therapy myself. I've been a few times in my life for a few situations. And some of them were very helpful.
Yeah.
And some of them I found to be very counterproductive. So I can kind of relate to what I'm saying here. And that is, so there's this stigma again, and then there's a preconceived notion about what it is and how it's going to be, or what the outcome should be if I go and talk a couple times and my problems go away. It's not how it works, right? The other side of it is having people coming into that profession as therapists that probably shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
It just like there's some people coming to law enforcement or fire service or whatever that shouldn't be there. Needless to say, they're there. So they're not culturally competent. They don't really understand. They don't maybe have the experience as a provider. And there's going to be a collision somewhere in the middle sometimes, which can create even more of a stigma.
Yeah.
And more barriers for getting into, for at least exploring it. I think, again, so when I hear it kind of being talked about in the space, I kind of hear it being talked about in a couple different ways. One's being very positive in the way that you're talking about it, and sometimes it's very negative because people have had more of the negative experience than the positive experience. And it's very quick to say, well, it's because it's the therapy. No, there's a lot of things that go into the therapy, and they're trying to put their finger on, like, therapy doesn't work. It's not, or even so bad as don't go there because it'll just make you worse. And that can happen. Right? That can happen if you don't have the right matchup. So I just want, like, as you're going through your process, your own personal process here, and finding solutions. And obviously, you mentioned something very important, which is having some support that's outside of therapy. I wonder, was the department or was your agency aware of this at all?
No.
Okay, so can you talk about that a little bit? And just, was that a choice?
No, I very few people knew. I think I told my sergeant at the time, like the first time it happened, and that was it. I didn't tell anybody else. I didn't know what it was.
Oh, you mean the event that happened?
Yeah.
Okay. Which how are we defining this? We're defining this as, was this medically defined like as a panic attack?
Yeah, it was a panic attack. Yeah.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
All right. So you didn't tell anybody but this person. No. Gotcha.
And then when I started getting into the therapy stuff, part of it was work related. So most agencies have an employee assistance program, so you can get therapy for free. It's not very long,
right? Through
depending
the
on
EAP.
Yeah. And so that can be kind of frustrating. And depending on where you are and what you're doing, there's groups that can help. I can't say enough great things about a group called Warfighter Overwatch. They're huge with helping military, first responder, just an amazing group of people. And they help a lot. They've helped me a lot with therapy stuff in the past, but you just sort of have to, it's all confidential. So you do your whole thing. And, I think when the biggest thing is, like, when you go on leave for something, that's where people get, like, it's It's not as bad as it used to be, because I think we're sort of making this, without making it like, I think normal is the wrong word, but more just acceptable and, open, versus years ago, talk to some of the older guys, and like, this one guy I met at a conference a couple of years ago, he smoked some dude in a shooting, and it really just didn't sit well with him. It was a younger kid, or can't remember what it actually happened, but he took time off and his team sent him a pair of pink panties in the mail. Jesus. And like, he was just like, man, like, am I the only one who feels this way? And of course, like, people will pull you aside in the dark. Hey man, I've been through, but they won't say it outright. That mentality is going away. And I think we have a more accepted version, but still, the way I can say it is that until you've experienced it yourself, and not that I was like judgmental or, I always knew that stuff was out there, but I had no idea. And then to think that with my own one time where I will call it a suicidal ideation, to dip my toe into that pond and to think about guys who are underwater, I was like, whoa, that's got to be the worst feeling. But then everything kind of made sense. And so, not that I had a hard time understanding it, because I've worked so many suicides over the years. People don't kill themselves to be selfish. They kill themselves to stop the pain. Mm-hmm. It's not and I used to get kind of, because I'm dealing with the aftermath in a detective capacity and a capacity on patrol, where more so in detectives, because we investigate all firearm suicides to rule out homicide. But the most aggravating factor in all of the scenarios is the family is just going, why? And you go, I don't know.
Right.
And sadly, no, most people don't leave notes. It doesn't work that way.
Figure that out.
And you'll never know. So it's frustrating. And so I had a weird perspective where I was just kind of like, dang, like I have to deal with all of this bullshit now. But then to kind of go back.
Personally, you mean?
Yeah. This is now my caseload and victim management. I've worked on homicides that were simpler than suicides, because you can tell someone, hey, your loved one
went to the ATM. Yeah.
They got shot. They were shot 3 times. They died, versus a suicide where you can say, I know that it wasn't a homicide, but I really can't tell you much else. Like, I don't know. The lights were on, this and this and this, and that's all I got. And they go, well, we kind of saw this coming. Everyone says that to some degree. Everyone in some degree says, yeah, not surprised. Like if they could rewind time, they would, but they very rarely do you ever hear someone say, no, this didn't happen. And if they are saying no, if you dug a little bit deeper, you'd see that it was the dad who was, removed from the picture for 2 decades. So yeah, he's going to feel some guilt or whatever the case may be. It's usually there's an emotional connection as to why that person feels a certain way. But sadly, no, a lot of those cases, they'll never know, but they'll spend the rest of their lives wondering why.
Yeah. So as you're going through your journey, I wonder when the writing for yourself, and I want to make a point here actually, because you mentioned a couple of things. First off, you mentioned you started working out. The fitness component became a very large part of this, and it wasn't just working out; it was being consistent at doing that. Right. You also mentioned the drinking and the drinking less.
Lawless,
yeah. Let's stop doing that. Let's start maybe having some conversations. Maybe they're with your therapist. Maybe they're with your wife. She's not your therapist, so
no, don't. Don't do that.
Right?
You can part of it, but not the whole thing.
I only bring those things up because it's never one thing. It's multifaceted in terms of feeling better and getting to the bottom of this for yourself. And I also want to make a point here, just with regard to, because you talked about the cases that you work. There's a big difference between suicidal ideations and being suicidal.
Oh, very much. Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people really understand that. And it might be tough to understand that, but there is this thought process that goes through. And one of the things you mentioned, one more time, the organizations you work through that help out.
Warfighter Overwatch.
Yeah, so I've got some local friends here. They run the Overwatch Collective.
Oh, cool.
They're also first responders that provide therapy in much the same way you just described to folks. And we're going back to the ideations versus actually being suicidal. One of the challenges, particularly with first responders, whether it's firefighters or even law enforcement officers, is that they know how to do it. Like they've seen it.
Oh, yeah.
Like you've seen it 100 times. Mm-hmm. So thinking about it, you're like 10 steps closer to the process, right, of actually doing it. So that doesn't mean you're going to do it. It just, like if you were going to, like, don't do it this way, because I've seen that go wrong. Oh, yeah. You could do it this way.
When most cops kill themselves, which is sadly fairly frequent, it's almost like they do it like a courtesy. Like I did it this way, I did it that way. So there's no, red flags. And sometimes, It depends. I had the unfortunate circumstance of working an employee suicide a few years ago, and there weren't a lot of answers. And it sucked because this was context. I knew this person. We had, texted a few days before, just really weird shit. To this day, I don't know. But there's been other ones where, they almost like just small things. Like they would let this one guy, he was retired, but he laid down on the deck and just no issue of backdrop, nothing like that. He just shot himself in the head and it went straight into the berm behind the house. And it's weird because you saw that to the average person, it looks weird, but he's like, no, I didn't want there to be any concern for my neighbors or whatever. So
yeah, man,
it's weird.
It's fucked up to think about, but it's a reality of the situation. So I only bring that up to go back to the other things that it is multifaceted and you start making these other changes in your life. And oftentimes those are things that have been missing for a long time. Sure. So you go back to time and being selfish and putting work in, right? And a lot of times, the way I think about this is, man, if we'd just been putting some of that work in earlier, like would we have ever gotten here? I won't know the answer to that, but like, again, taking care of yourself physically, taking care of yourself mentally, making sure you're not putting things in that are that exacerbate, these situations. Make sure you're putting things out or getting things out, that finding hobbies, doing things. And again, those are things, going back to that word selfish. I had this conversation with somebody the other day, buddy of mine down in South Florida, who's an officer down there. And we were just talking about, hey, like a lot of times first responders will just like task saturate themselves, especially like the high achieving ones. They'll volunteer for this adjunct duty and they'll do that. And they end up, they put things on the plate that ends up taking things off the plate for themselves, right? Yeah. Which is taking care of themselves. And so I bring that up to say, like, going all the way back to the therapy piece. And then I want to switch into like when this started to become, when you started to kind of publish some of this stuff and how that happened. Just that there's multiple things that kind of go on here before you kind of find the thing that works for you. Again, going back to hobbies and maybe spending less time doing cop stuff. Yeah. Right. Less time hanging around with cops all the time when you're not being a cop, so you're not bitching and moaning about the same stuff all the time or just being inundated with the same stuff. Again, I'm just an outside dude looking in, but I've been around a lot of this for the last several years. And it's the same stuff every time. That's why I feel confident in saying it. Yeah. Going back to the Zen Cop and the writing, and at some point this starts to become more public. You start putting it out there. What was the impetus for this?
I think around, I don't know, when I started to make a decision, like I kind of needed to I think the thing that I found that was irritating was I wasn't finding enough. So like just kind of self-sourcing information. There's stuff out there, but when we talked offline before the show, and I'm a firearms instructor for my agency, I can go on social media and I can figure out the next quarter's training just by watching a YouTube video. It's just out there. Yeah. And so when I was doing my own research, I found very little that involved what I was seeking. And so it's kind of that old mentality where if I can, I should, and I could. So I did. And when I first went public, I bought the domain name and then just threw out a blog. And I said, okay, we'll see if anyone even, it has a reaction or connection to it. And then the writing was more for me. I just did it with the intent of, how can I share and help? And to this day, I don't make any money. I actually lose money every month doing all this stuff. So it's not any way for other than I'm just trying to help other people, because I feel like if you have the ability to do it. And my rule for life is very simple. You should leave this life and being able to say you gave more than you took. And that's just kind of
leave it better than you found it.
Yeah. And so I started doing more blog posts, and one day someone said, hey, that was a cool post you did over the weekend. I said, you read that? And they were like, yeah. I was like, oh, that's cool. I thought I was just talking to nobody. And they said, no, a lot of the guys read it. You should do more. Cool. And so I kept doing more and then more. And then someone had said, it's easier. And it sucks because I'm guilty of it. We all are. But, if you want to know, my passion is writing. So if you go on like Instagram or anywhere else, most of my earlier episodes mirrored the blog, but it was because no one really sits down and reads anymore. Yeah, I barely can. Yeah. My wife, she's a voracious reader, but I just can't do it. And so it's either audiobook or it's a podcast.
Same, man.
that's like where I started to go to the more, I guess, audio route, where I started to talk a little bit more. And then my first guest was Adam from Police Post.
Yep. Adam Hadari.
It was a really cool conversation. We still talk once in a while, but yeah, I started to just say, publicly kind of how I was feeling, what I was doing. And then it just sort of took off from there. You and I actually spoke a while ago. Yep. I would say it's almost been a year or two. Mm-hmm. But at the time I wasn't showing my face. I have a face for radio, but no, it was more work related. I just didn't really, I still had some stuff I was doing that I wasn't sure if I was going to pursue it. And, I just sort of had to break the ice. And Ed Calderon from Manifesto Podcast was kind enough to extend an invite, and that was it. And that was my first time going public, and that was in Tijuana, and a really amazing experience. It was a little scary at first, but then it was fun. But that was kind of like, okay, I can do this, and I want to do more. And being a guest is fun. As much as it's fun hosting and writing, I actually enjoy these a lot more than my own stuff, just because it's more relaxed. And
I get it. I mean, you're good. You're a conversationalist. You're very skilled at it. So maybe we just talk a little bit about, because we got into this topic of therapy and how you were seeking to help yourself here. I don't want to make this all about that. So I'm shift gears here on that and talk about the things that you're talking about. Maybe just give people an idea if they haven't heard your show, they haven't read your blog, like what are the topics that you're talking about? Because it's not all about therapy. So let's put that out there.
It's not therapy.
It goes way beyond this.
It's not cop stuff either. I mean, there is relevance to it, but like one of the things that I don't, there's enough cop talk out there.
Agreed.
And I'll just full disclosure, I've never been one to live that lifestyle. I'm passionate about my job. It is a lifestyle. There's parts of my job that you can't, just sort of take off and walk away from. But I also don't live a life that's just cop everything. And I'm also not normal in that regard. I would consider myself to be kind of like just a different mindset than most, but oddly enough, it's made me a really good cop over the years. I don't have one way of thinking. I have multiple ways of thinking. And I try not to live this lifestyle every day. And someday I won't do this anymore. So there needs to be
something else,
purpose and meaning. And, I haven't said this yet, but part of my plan is I finished my bachelor's a couple of years ago, and I want to get my master's in psychology to do clinical therapy for first responders. That's my exit. I would like to do that before I'm 50, and then just kind of have that be my fallback. I don't see myself not working to some degree. And the older I get, before I age out too much, I can still be valuable. I think there's some guys that try to stay in the game too long, and then not to say that their experience isn't relevant, but maybe it's just not going to you're not going to grab the attention, and you might not make the connection. But while I still can, I think it's a good thing. And to have a perspective that's just sort of neutral and not specific to one thing. So going back to what you were talking about, everything I do, I hope that someone could listen to it regardless of what they did for a living, regardless of, political opinion, and you can take something away, because I feel like there's so much one-sided stuff out there that you can consume that all you want. The things that I talk about, if they are cop related, usually they encompass everybody. It's not just limited to law enforcement, and that's just kind of, I think the average person, no matter where they are geographically, but we're in California, there's a lot that they don't know that is just, unless you really dive into it, and we have all these issues, and people like to complain about the issues. But when it comes to like, well, how we got here, it can create a really slippery slope. And that goes down to, I don't really like politics, but politics dictate law. And, all these small things that we do can create a bad society or a very chaotic society.
Yeah. So you did a really good job of explaining it, because that's what I pulled away too, which is really why I wanted to, it's really what drove me to go, man, I gotta get this guy down here if I can get him here. And that is your approach to problem solving. Mm-hmm. And you're doing that through education, and doing it in your own way. And this isn't, when I say education, not like from the institution of,
Sure.
It's more of, let's provide a little bit of history and a little bit of background here, and how, in a lot of cases, where we are currently has been shaped by what happened in the past. So let's review this and then see all the things that happen. And then within there, You're also, I've heard you talk about a couple of incidents as an example, historical incidents that people would probably be very familiar with. You should go listen and you'll know which ones I'm talking about. That's the teaser for that. But the things that will go on that were known then that maybe weren't known, or weren't known then that are known now. And what I mean by that is technology has changed. Sure. So in the past we've had like body worn, or in the past we've had video cameras and closed circuit TV, and now we have body worn camera footage. How does that impact how an officer shows up on scene, and how do they do things? And then how did that impact a policy, which then impacted, then how did that impact a society's view on how police work gets done? And then how did that impact some policy making? And then how did that policy making then impact the law? Mm-hmm. And then how did that law long-term impact where we are now and the things that both society and law enforcement have to deal with? And with that comes things like mindset, things that come up in there for me are helping law enforcement officers specifically. Again, it's not just for law enforcement officers, but I think this is for people in general to understand a few things about what the public is facing as well as what the law enforcement officers are facing. And these are human characteristics. Mm-hmm. This isn't cop stuff, right? Yeah. This is human stuff. Things like how law enforcement is presented to the public. And what does the public actually want? And this has been a big topic of conversation for me lately. And that is like, what does the public actually value in our law enforcement officers, in our agencies? And more specific, and then taking to the next point in the line is like, what does a law enforcement agency actually value in the law enforcement officer? And I guess I skipped the middle part. It was like, what does the law enforcement officer value about his or her job? Mm-hmm. Right. And you walked through a few of those things earlier, like the rewards of some of the things that you've done and getting to the bottom of things and in dealing with some of the awful stuff. But there is such a disconnect there, man. Yeah. And so when you go through some of this stuff and so, in your blogs and then also in your podcast, you get to hear these things and it puts it in a little bit of a different perspective. Like again, it's not just, this is where we are now, let's bitch about it, and this is wrong, and this sucks, and we need a new policy to undo the policy. It's like, we have to go all the way back to understand how we got here. And again, going back like social media and surfing the net and trying to find answers, like you were talking about trying to do for yourself, like you weren't finding what you were looking for. Mm-hmm. And that's, I haven't been either. Like I've been looking for answers to this stuff. Like what does our public actually value in our law enforcement agencies? And what does the law enforcement agency, again, and value in their officers? And there's a few things that come up along the way. And a couple of topics that you spoke on that I want to maybe dig into a little bit is this whole idea of being a warrior versus being a guardian. Mm-hmm. And I think this speaks to the values piece with regard to society or our cities, right? Our towns, our public. What do they want? Do they want a guardian or what do they want a warrior? And we can talk about that. More specifically, what do they need? Mm-hmm. And what should we be getting out of our law enforcement officers? So maybe we can I'll kind of just throw that out on the table and let you run with it.
So those words actually came from a friend of mine. He works for a sheriff's department and he was selected to be a recruit training officer, so RTO. So it's basically the really scary person from the academy that yells at you and does all that stuff. And this guy's just a beast of a human. And when he told me he got the job, I kind of laughed because I felt really bad for all the recruits. That he was just going to smoke everybody. But he was selected, and I can't remember who it was, his supervisor or the sheriff, I don't know. But they told him, give me warriors, not guardians. And the problem that we're having as of late, and so we kind of have to go back a little bit. Well, why are we here? Well, we're here because of 2020, and we can't undo that. So it's done. Mm-hmm. Anything post-conflict, there's going to be months or years of how we return to a new normal. And I don't really care what the incident was. It doesn't matter because, just like all the other incidents we can reference, the end result is the end result. And the nuts and bolts, we could dissect that all we want, but we're here now. And now we're still 4 years away from this, huge just sort of atom bomb that went off. And I would say that it's a weird time for policing because the first couple of years, I would say you had almost no applicants and this isn't to knock anyone who applied at the time, but I would venture to say that most of the ones who, had a brain in their head said, no, thank you. I don't want to do this. This is not for me. And the ones that stuck around, yeah, there might have been some good ones in there, but the reality is a lot of them were not very good and probably would have been told, no, thank you. And
had the circumstances been different.
Exactly. So, but we still have to fill boots to have them in cars to go do their job. So it was weird. You had hiring standards that were getting lowered. You had a bunch of stuff. And the guardian mindset is exactly that. It's someone who can kind of stand watch and sort of just sit there and wait for a call to come out and go deal with it and then go back to the same spot. Are there nights like that on patrol? Absolutely. If you work midnights or graveyard, yeah, there's from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., not a lot going on, even for the bad guys. It's, it's kind of the witching hour, but it's also where most of that populace is dead asleep, including the bad guys. So, but the warrior mindset, though, if you consider just movement as life, and if you're trying to disrupt the criminal element, then you do have to go out and do things. And, depending on who's in charge, if you have a good supervisor, if you have someone, and this is all just stuff that I've taken away, a good supervisor and someone who's well-versed and has done enough to where they know what you can and can't do with confidence, right? And you can create a team that has confidence in your decision-making and leadership. All that stuff matters, because I'm not talking about my agency in particular, but nationwide. There's a lot of probably frontline supervisors who are just like, man, this is a scary time to be a cop right now. And so they might err on the side of caution and say, no, we're not going to do this, or no, we're not going to do that. You'll hear things like, pursuits being canceled left and right, which I can agree with to some degree, right? If this is a property crime and they stole something from Walmart and they're driving away, do we really need to go 120 miles an hour to catch them? Well, what if, your significant other was driving on the same freeway and the bad guy hit the car and killed him? Of course, it's things that we have to consider. So totality of circumstances, all that stuff. But, I think that the biggest takeaway for that mindset is that that's what society wants. Even if that portion of society says they don't want it that way, they do, because that mindset will change when their front door gets broken down at 2:00 in the morning. They're going to want it right fucking now.
Right.
Give it to me as hard as you can. Everybody, all that, they're going to want it right now. Well, 2 weeks before, well, this is too aggressive. We have this.
It was just
that.
Walmart, man.
Exactly. So that's kind of that weird dynamic where you have different portions of society expecting certain things to be done a certain way. Now, what's interesting in cop world that most people don't see, the average person in their life will get pulled over twice. That's kind of a national statistic.
Way above average.
Yeah. And in those scenarios, it's usually by a traffic cop. It is a part of what we do. It's not my jam. I don't like it. I don't think I've written a ticket since I was on training, and that was just for training purposes. And it probably got thrown out because I did a terrible job, but that's what some guys like. But that's the most consistent you'll see, or you'll have that contact in a lifetime, is usually for something involving a vehicle code violation.
Gotcha.
And usually in those scenarios, is the cop very nice? Not really. They usually just come up, do their thing.
You know what the end result is. You're getting a ticket. It costs you money and time.
You do or you don't. And so they go, well, all cops are dicks, this and that. And it's funny because that stigma doesn't exist. If I had a plumber come to my house and he was an asshole, I wouldn't spend the rest. Oh, plumbers are assholes, man.
I'm never calling that guy. No. I'm never calling a plumber again.
But I would. But in my mind, though, I wouldn't outcast all plumbers. Well, not all plumbers are bad. Maybe that. So it's kind of a catch-all, but by design, because the job we have is not popular by some. But eventually, they're going to need some type of assistance, and so it's a really weird dynamic when you consider, especially post any catastrophic event, to where the mindset changes, but we need this now, but that's too much. No, stop. That's not going to change. But politically and socially, we have this really weird dynamic now where, it's a whole new level to where, and everyone, you can't take politics away from this, because like we talked about, that dictates law. It dictates assembly bills and Senate
100%.
bills. So I remind people, pay attention to your local government. Go to the PTA meetings, because someone in that room who's on that board is going to run for city council someday. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And, if you don't want to participate, fine, I get it. But if we're not aware of what's being pushed forward and the agendas within that community, I live where I live now because of my family. My in-laws live close by. My mom lives close by. But if I were to sort of remove myself and start over, I would go somewhere geographically where everyone thought the same way, and that the local government thought the same way. You and I are both residents of California. It's very different here. And so some of the things that, we're, dealing with are a direct result of political stuff. And, it's unfortunate, but that's kind of a long-winded answer for the topic we were talking about. But it's the guardian warrior mindset is going to be circumstantial to what your agency will allow. And I'm lucky. I work for an agency that still lets us go do work. And some people may not like it, but there's a certain part of society that needs to be addressed a certain way. And if you don't, well, then you're going to lose. And losing just isn't losing. It's societal decay. So if the bad guys in one area know that certain things won't be dealt with, they're going to do that thing to a T. They're going to come within an inch of that margin, knowing that, if we look at some of the stuff in California, the dollar amounts, the Prop 47 stuff, the $900, they will do the math knowing that it's less than that. So that's a small version versus, we don't pursue for X, Y, Z. So they know they can run. But like I said in the beginning, it's going to be specific to where you live, your agency, what the policies are. And unfortunately for some people, they get a really rude awakening when, they expect something and they say, we can't do that. And that's because of state law, or it's because of my county policy or city ordinance. And they usually kind of have that awakening where they go, no, this isn't right.
And then who gets blamed?
The cops usually. Or, it doesn't really go to where it needs to go. But I remind people, whenever you vote, whenever you do anything, don't guess. Like if it's not a Scantron, if you don't know, don't vote. And I think some people just look to see if it's a D or an R next to it and they circle it and say, yeah, cool, do it. And then 10 years later, they're like, man, what happened?
We're seeing that in spades now, particularly like in this neighborhood, in this city right now. It's people that, I've literally had conversations with 10 years ago, or having much different conversations with them now. And at the time I was disenfranchised with a lot of things. And in fact, I just had somebody in my office today. She says, remember that conversation you had with me, when you guys were over at the house having dinner and, you were telling me why you didn't vote anymore here and how disenfranchised you were. She's like, I'm that close. And this is somebody that sees things very, very differently. We're great friends.
Yeah.
Just sees things very differently. I think even the most divided in a sense for so long are having to see the same things that everybody else is seeing. It's just where do they come together in the middle at some point? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know the answers to that. I think it has to get worse before it gets better. How much worse? I don't know. And then how does it get better? But going back to Warriors versus Guardians. So I imagine, oh man, you kind of talk about this period of time, and you're right. It happened, right? It's over. We've moved on from that, or we have to move on from that. Sorry, but however, you had warriors that were kind of overnight being told they need to be guardians, more than warriors, right? And I think about this, and what do you have to do to get through that? If you're one of those people, and we've lost a lot of officers who have taken early retirement, or they've just like, nah, I'm not going to take that promotion. I'm just gonna. You guys really don't want me there because at least that's their perception. You don't want me there because I want to do the job and you don't want me to do the job. And that's a very blanket statement. I want to be careful about it. It doesn't mean you can't do your job. Just means you have to do it differently. And maybe they've chosen like, I don't want to do it that way because it goes against my moral fabric, my ethical fabric, whatever the things are. But I fear like what you've done now is now you have to make warriors out of guardians as this new, I don't want to say generation, just this new kind of way of thinking has happened, particularly here in California. And that creates conflict internally at the law enforcement level. But then obviously that's going to massively bleed over onto the street with the public and the things that we're dealing with. And then you're always going to have, going back to the types of criminals that are out there, how are they going to bend the rules? How are they going to figure out the weak links in the chain, weak areas of the city? And again, we're learning all of those things now. We're seeing it. It's on our streets every single day. Again, particularly here in California, where it's not isolated here. It's just where you and I live and what I see every day. So I wonder, I think the question is this, like, what are the skills that you have to have internally, like personal skills? What are the things you have to have on board to be able to deal with that right now as an officer, as a warrior, who's in some cases maybe been told or influenced, like, dude, you need tone it down a little bit, or you can't do it this way anymore. You need to be more of the guardian. What are the things that you have to have downloaded in order to be able to deal with that kind of a transition in this particular time that seems like, I don't know, it's kind of languishing. Like there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of bitterness. There's a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. Maybe that's more of the specific term. What do you got? What do you have to have in order to deal with that?
Patience is a big thing. It's patience and it's location. Everything in cop world is location, because
it's interesting.
I could literally have my stance on something and drive 50 miles and go to a different county.
Totally different.
So leadership is temporary in any agency. So I think you get to see your agency's true colors, and working for a police department and a sheriff's department, I can tell you that the sheriff's department, this is just my own experience, has been just better. It's an elected official by the people. The police chiefs are appointed. So you'll see a lot of pressure, and usually in most scenarios for police departments, you'll see a lot of people that will cave and sort of submit to this concept. Now, this goes back to understanding where you live. Like when you move somewhere, or am I living in a county or am I living in a city? Because they're two different fields of thought, and you're going to get very different responses to certain issues. So geographically, I really can't say it enough. It may look like a nice neighborhood, but what does that zip code give me? Am I going to be, served by this agency or that agency? And public service is kind of just a small footprint of everything else, whether it's city council or county council, very different fields of thought. So I think if you start to understand that, there might be some things that you can't change. And my advice to people is look at what you can change and look at what's just not going to happen. And understand that if you can't change those things, that's fine. That's the way it is. Focus on what you can change. If you start to see roadblocks everywhere you go, and this is going to hyperextend beyond just a few years, then maybe you start thinking about changing agencies or jobs, whatever it is. But try to differentiate between what is going to be a temporary problem, which could be years, versus a long-term problem that we're probably never going to change. Be careful with those, because change is very scary. Starting over is scary. And, the grass is greener until you get into the weeds. So everywhere is going to have weeds, but how much and what kind of weed they are is going to be, is it crabgrass or is it thistle, right? I mean, I don't know,
poison ivy.
Yeah, right. Very different. So you could have problems that may be, catastrophic to you. I try to really not dig too deep into things that I can't change, because that's just the way it is. And if it's based on an administration issue, then this person who's in charge feels that it's going to be the best thing, and you probably can't change their mind. So be cautious in the energy you invest in certain topics or problems. Smart. Yeah. I mean, there's just some things that can't change. Policy can change. So if you're, really good at writing, or you're good at speaking or something, and you want to be an advocate for something, then it all starts with a memo. Policy changes can happen. Ordinances can happen. I mean, it's all stuff that will take work, and just be ready for a long wait. Or you can just sit back and say, okay, this is the way it is. I mean, it's frustrating because there's so many things that we could change, but they're just not going to be a priority for the top. And I always remind the patrol guys that the things that you're really upset about, they probably know about them. But as I started to grow in my career and I started to get involved in a lot more advanced and even internal investigations, I was like, wow, the stuff that I was worried about doesn't even pale in comparison.
So small.
So, pick your battles. But I always tell people, you're not a tree. If it's really that bad and things aren't changing, then move. I mean, it sucks and it's hard, but if you're going to stay, don't become so cynical and self-deprecating that you just destroy your own life and make it worse. So,
that's such wise words. I think it's so true too. I'm just staying on that topic and how that bleeds. That's kind of what's happening internally, and how an officer might feel about the agency, or the agency might feel about officers. Usually it's the officers feeling about the agency, or the leadership or whatever, and how that bleeds over into the street. And let's just say onto the streets, but when in dealing with the public and dealing with these things, again, showing up to somewhere where, I don't know, 5 years ago, like this person, what happened to you is definitely a crime. right? And it's a crime at this level, and it yields this type of response, and this is what we can do, and this is what we can't do. But it was more like, yep, we're going to go after this guy. Cool, we got a description. We're going to go do this thing. This criminal will likely face jail time, whatever. They're definitely getting arrested today. They're definitely going to jail. Obviously, the judicial system handles it after that, but this is what I can do. To the stark change, went back to like Prop 47 and how things here in California changed so dramatically. And then again, how things were kind of, I guess, piled on top of that as we got into this 2020, 2021 time where crime started to not be crime anymore in the way that we'd known it and we'd seen it. And for lack of a better term, what's right and versus what's wrong. Like in my mind, again, managing things around a dollar figure, which then influences all the things like, do we chase? Do we not chase? Do we arrest them? Do we not arrest them? This is cite and release, whatever. So you're having to deal with public in the street on this stuff now. And going back to Guardians versus Warriors, you mentioned patience. The other thing that comes to mind for me is something that I find to be really off balance just in society. So this isn't just a cop thing. This is a human thing. And that is the term, the concept of empathy. And we have these like extreme ends right now where you have some people that have absolutely zero and don't know how to have it, right? Or don't want to have it. And then you have the other side where it just seems like it's too much. Like, come on now. Like, we have shit we have to get. Crime is crime, right? People have to be punished. There has to be a stick, right, at the end of this. Like, I'm not saying go out and beat people up or, whatever. That's not what I'm saying. But there needs to be, we need to be understanding of what's going on. This isn't that big a deal. But then this goes back to what you were saying about the Walmart versus the home invasion. Yeah. Right? Like, where do we draw the line? Like, there has to be crime versus whether it's a huge corporation or not. So again, the term empathy comes up for me in terms of being that guardian and that warrior. I would think that the warrior in particularly has got to really get a good handle on this if they want their interactions on their job daily with the public to be productive. And I don't necessarily mean just for the public and whatever the reasons they got called to be there were, but when they go home at the end of the day. And because I struggle with that myself, on the empathy side, like I see stuff and we deal with stuff here on a regular basis, just living and working in the downtown area where I'm like, I just don't care. Like, and I have to check myself on occasion because as soon as I start doing that, like, man, I stop caring about a lot of things and that turns into anger and it's so easy for me to go there. And then where does that get projected? So I've heard you talk a little bit about empathy, and seen you write a little bit about that and just kind of where that comes up and how to practice that and how to understand the balance of that as a guardian versus a warrior. And what does that mean? When you're coming to the table for that, okay, it was the petty theft at the hardware store just down the street here that gets hit every single day, right? With the homeless shelter right next door to it, that kind of thing, to the incident that is escalated to a much higher level and you have somebody there at gunpoint or something like that, and where empathy fits in and how you balance that as an officer, particularly in the line of work, particularly in today's age. It's
hard because I think people, if they really understand like sympathy and empathy, the difference and how, I think I would definitely say that it comes with time on and age. It's a big part of it, obviously. And the older you are, not necessarily super old, but if you have the opportunity to experience some of that stuff when you're young, especially as a younger cop, your empathy is going to be based on kind of what you've seen. But I think it's a balance too, to where you can be empathetic in any profession and still, if your job does involve some degree of disciplinary action, then in a weird way, you're going to use that empathy to help somebody. And like we talked about earlier, the differences between, evil and just sort of the run-of-the-mill criminal, they're very different. So empathy will go a long way if you use it with any public contact, not just criminal. So you could, pick your poison for whatever call for service you're going to. And, but empathy is paired with morale too. So
this is where I was going with that.
Kind of like where if everything's bad, right? I mean, if morale is bad at work, things aren't going well, my mood and my attitude is going to be extremely reminiscent of the what's going on at work, basically inside the office. And when you have agencies where morale is terrible and there's just not enough time in the day to fix the issues, then that's going to spill over to the response on a patrol level. And empathy and patience usually go out the window. And this, let's just take it out of context entirely. If you're just going through a divorce or something really traumatic and you're not the best version of yourself, you don't just turn that off when you go to work. It's going to follow you.
100%.
And you're going to have a bad day because you're having a bad week. And that's something that we have to sort of keep in check ourselves. But if it's a agency issue, then that particular area, going back to the concept of like societal decay, a lot of people will even reference for like the shoplifting stuff. I mean, do I really care that Target sees a loss? Does it really affect me? No. But as a citizen of that area, where I have to go get someone to unlock a case now, or all the things that happen, I'm going to stop going to these locations because now it's unsafe. Or I can't find anybody because there's no employees because they had to cut so many people because of the loss they take. That's the stuff that matters. So, empathy can be a really broad brush if you look at how it how it directly affects society overall, right? All it takes is one bad contact. And if you look at some of the major, look at George Floyd. The initial call for service was a fake $20 bill. That was it. That was the nexus to that call. And look where we are. My God. Mm-hmm. I mean, the simplest of, that doesn't get much more black and white than that. It's a $20 bill. It's fake. And then here we are 4 years later. So it is weird to think about these very small scenarios where I don't know if empathy would have fixed that scenario. I don't know. But I think of all the would haves and could haves, which is scary when you think about just how close we came to a repeat incident, but maybe patience and empathy was the reason why it didn't happen.
Yeah. That's a big one that you just pulled up there. And I think about that. And I think it's completely relates to, we were talking about the Walmart or the Target versus the home invasion, and that it was a counterfeit $20 bill.
That's all it was.
And we should care that somebody is trying to pass a counterfeit bill at one of these inner city neighborhood, urban neighborhood convenience stores that's on the, liquor store, convenience store, however we're defining that, on the corner, because it fucking matters. Mm-hmm. Because when that happens, it can lead to these other things. And again, to just not care doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, that was the impetus of the question. You took it somewhere that I didn't really think about. That makes a lot of sense to me. And thinking about it bigger picture, and again, this ongoing conversation I've been having about officers training, kind of what we're seeing. We have a much larger population of less seasoned officers in a much different time, that are coming to the table. And there's a lot of, again, let's go back to the beginning, like there's body worn camera footage, and we're seeing stuff happen. What appears to be like very inexperienced, untrained, I'm saying this in air quotes, untrained, and just a disproportionate amount of people that are ready for the thing when it happens. Mm-hmm. And we want to basically say, hey, it's because of lack of firearms training, or it's a lack of fitness, and it's all of those things are included there. But again, to discount it and not think about like kind of where that comes from, and versus the good things that we do see, and because there's, again, going back to body worn camera footage, there's stuff out there where you're just going, dude, that dude was on it. Like that officer handled it, right? There was just one recently that came out, guy going through a glass window, hostage situation. Is like, that's the cop I want if I got to call 911, the one that's going to get in there. But the way he handled himself, and there was also that how it escalated, and then when that person knew when to take action at a different level, and it started with maybe somebody else would have not done that, right? I think that's clear. We've seen plenty of that, but also like the different points, like what am I actually here for? Like as an officer, and being able to go through this process of like, this person seems to be having a really bad day today. Like I've seen this before, and I get that. Okay. So rather than doing something that could escalate this to the next level, I don't know if it will or it won't, but what are the things that I could do from an empathetic perspective to at least maybe not say something or trigger something or trigger a behavior or trigger a thought that then escalates this to the next level to where it turns into something more. Yeah. And that's directly related to empathy. And if you're going to work every day with a bad attitude, right, and morale is down, and people are pissed off. And yes, you have a lack of experience, a lack of training, and a lack of, well, I guess the term is experience around all of these things. What do you expect is going to happen out there on the street?
For sure.
And the first people that come to the table with that are officers, right? That are like, this is fucking bad. This is so bad, and here's all the reasons why. But I just, again, like I come back to this, like, yeah, but man, this is a deeper level to this. And what are we doing out on the street to avoid these things or teach these younger officers, give them some experience around this if everybody's pissed off, including the warriors, right? Because if the warriors are pissed off and they're not helping the guardians, if
they're going to mimic what they do.
100% every time. I feel like that's where we're at.
Yeah. And it's good. I mean, I'll say this, that there's far more good that happens every day than bad.
100%. We never see it.
But the bad just gets highlighted. You know, the recent one, maybe like 6 months ago now, where she threw the pot of water at him.
Yeah.
That incident probably happened 20,000 times across the U.S. in the same 24-hour period, but that was the one that went bad. Because the cops wanted, I mean, I don't think they knew what they were doing. They escalated that. So escalation, that's a really popular term right now, de-escalation, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But be mindful and cognizant of, of self-escalating versus, we can try and de-escalate, but, know what you're doing and why you're doing it. The hostage one recently, he very quickly determined I can do X, Y, Z, and it comes with risk, but it's worth it. Versus someone in the house by themselves, don't force the issue. And we don't have to go into someone's house if they're alone. There's no threat to anyone. Cool. Well, does it suck when we leave and he still acts like a fool? Well, yeah, that's going to happen though. But would you rather have that or press the issue and then this dude gets shot for no reason? Like, we don't need that. So it's a tough job because even with the empathy stuff, like you're still going to be judged by the 1%.
The one time.
Which is unfortunate, but it's a reality, right? I mean, I don't blame the public for feeling that way because it creates doubt. And when you create doubt, you have a whole new, my rule is like with the toothpaste theory, where it's really easy to squeeze it out, hard to put it back in. If we have one screw up in law enforcement, that could last for
10 seconds.
Yeah. And it gives us 10 years of work versus, the good stuff, which very rarely makes the news. And that's just a societal thing where everything's inherently negative because we just have that bloodlust. We want the bad and the news knows that. And they're going to focus on that. There's tons of social media groups where you just go, good God, like KTLA 5 in Los Angeles, they post the most heinous shit. And it's like, I get it.
Views,
but it's
man.
like,
views and likes.
Exactly. Man. So that's the tech boom that we're in right now. And everything's so readily available, which is good and bad because I like the transparency. I like that we have body cams. I like that we have all this technology. But very seldom does it get used for not what it should be used for, but in the light that it should be used, where, there's a lot of good things that happen. That hostage video was awesome, but we see more, I guess, fuck ups online than we do anything else.
All the time.
And everyone else wants to jump in and give their opinion. And, we can't be perfect. I wish we could. Training, yeah, if you're lucky enough, if the agency gives you enough. And again, that's agency dependent. You may have people that are in dire straits and they can't afford to do extracurricular. My agency, we shoot 4 times a year. I wish we did DTAC 4 times a year. We don't. Why? Probably money, staffing, all this other stuff. So I'm fortunate that we shoot 4 times a year, but there's some agencies that don't. They shoot once a year. It's time, it's money, and what's funny is all of these things that occur, officer-involved shootings are quite rare. They don't happen as much as people think. But what does happen tenfold is basic contacts or verbal things that turn into a physical altercation that result in some of the most heinous of circumstances. George Floyd being one of them, where we saw something happen that went from 0 to 100 very quickly, and here we are. And those instances and scenarios happen all the time. And it's just like, man, we're just sort of rolling the dice.
That's what I was going to say. You're rolling the dice. You're living on the bleeding edge constantly. Yeah, it's more of a mindset type conversation, and it's not just for cops, right? It's for people that aren't cops, and how it's being judged, how police work is being judged, or how it's being viewed. And yeah, we can't help what's being flashed in front of their face, all the time. That's going to continue, and it's not likely going to continue that we'll see a bunch more of heroic acts like we saw. And I don't even know if I define what that guy did in the hostage situation as a heroic act. I think my bet is if he talks like, I was doing my job. Like, this is what I signed up to do, and this is what the circumstances served me up, and so this is what I did. And I saw a lot of commentary about it, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. Other people would disagree, because the reality of it is the guy didn't have to do that.
He didn't have to, but it's like, well, what if I didn't? And it's damned if you do, fucked if you don't. Like that's just kind of
that's the warrior mindset.
The bubble, yeah.
That's the warrior mindset, though. That's.
But as long as you can articulate, and I always tell this to people, like especially the younger guys, don't just limit your training to tactics, expand case law, all these things that will protect you civilly and criminally. And it may not be pretty, right? Because violence isn't pretty. And unfortunately, the work that we do involves a large amount of violent activity, whether it's something really heinous or something as simple as just arresting someone. It is an act of like
law enforcement.
Violence. It's the way it goes.
Force is in the word.
Exactly. So if you are operating within the law and you know what you're doing and you have confidence in that, and supervisory, roles that will tell you about why you can't do certain things. There's no reason why, if you had a question about, I don't know, pick your topic, that you couldn't go onto some website somewhere and find the answers, not opinion, but case law. Here's why we can, here's why we cannot. And bring that information to your briefings. Have just more than the basics, because that's where I think when it comes down to seconds making a difference, and in your head, I'm good.
Confidence.
Cool. Then you're making the right decision, and you can articulate why you did that, even if it's not necessarily the right thing to do or the popular version. If you can explain yourself, great. If you can't, that's going to be really hard for you.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I mean, there's people maybe listening to this going, dude, you took the empathy thing too far. Okay, I get it. I get it. That me, not you, me, Scott. The confidence piece is where that gets matched, though,
for sure.
And the ability or capability that you have to do your job. And again, that confidence piece being such a huge thing when it's like, I've been empathetic as long as I can. Now this has turned to something different.
Correct.
And feeling okay, not just okay, feeling good about the decision that you're making. Not good that you've got to, again, utilize some type of a force, whether it's hands-on or a tool or something like that. But knowing that this is what this has gotten to now. I know the steps because I understand the case law. I understand.
Or try to imagine what a jury of 12 would think. Neutral party, right? So like you have this scenario, and granted, like there's just somewhere we can all agree this shouldn't have happened this way. Okay, cool. Like if you just, I don't know, pick just shooting someone completely it's the worst case scenario. It doesn't matter how you got there. There's no context necessary. It should not have happened. Versus, hey, they show the last 15 seconds of whatever it was, but we go back and we look at the half hour it took of talking and escalation. So as long as you're doing something that in the long game, you can justify and say, hey, I was operating within policy, within law, and I tried my best, but it didn't work out. For two reasons. One, for your own personal liability. And two, I don't think people understand what goes into a scenario like that and how it changes your life forever.
I agree with you 100%. Like I wouldn't, like I can't, because I've never done that before. So, but also the public looking in, like they have no idea. Mm-hmm. Going back to the body-worn camera footage and going into having to go into the courtroom, right? Yeah. And a jury of 12 sitting there and analyzing every single thing over weeks, days, weeks, months that happened inside a 30-second period, or maybe a 30-minute period for that matter. Yeah. Everything gets dissected, right? And I think it was you that I heard talking about this, and it struck me. I was like, man, I never really thought of it that way. So, what are the things that go into that, when the brain goes from now we're switching over, or I've just showed up on scene. I have some preliminary information. It came over dispatch, whatever else. It's sitting there, it came over the radio. It's on my computer in the car, whatever the case is. And I show up, all right, I have a little information and how quickly things can escalate. Yeah. And I guess my point of that is as things are escalating, what are the things that if you aren't squared away and put together and you don't think matter, right then, because this is what we do every day here on the street. But this is the one time where this thing is going all the way to the end, right? On whatever that is. It's going to be an OIS, and it ends up being an OIS. You're going to be weighed and measured on every single thing you do. What are some of those things?
Everything.
Sorry, let me ask a more specific question.
Sure.
Because that's really broad. I just mean when those jurors are looking at that camera footage, We could talk about all the things, warrior mindset. We could talk about de-escalation. We can talk about empathy. We can talk about case law. We can talk about policy. I guess what I'm looking for is like, what are the things that maybe somebody that doesn't have this experience yet needs to know going in that they might not think is a big deal, because that senior guy, I've seen him handle it this way 100 times. So I'm just handling it the same way, not understanding what the ramifications of that could be when you're sitting in the courtroom.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, so it all goes back to just sort of what you're doing and what a reasonable person would be able to identify with. And we can't always get that, but if you were, I don't think people understand the exposure that happens when you're involved in a critical incident of any kind, and how it can be skewed certain ways. A lot of all that stuff, though, for the cop, if they did their job the right way, it goes into the investigation portion of it. So, don't be afraid to say what you were feeling, right? Like, I mean, if you felt a certain way, don't mask it. Don't be a badass. Tell them, I thought I was going to die. I literally thought about my family. I thought that if I didn't do this, that I would die and I wouldn't be here right now. And, it's hard to, because everyone kind of wants to talk about all the things they did that were tactical and all this other stuff. Tell me how you feel or how you felt. Those are huge. But I mean, if you look at the jury pool, and it's kind of funny, it's sad, it's not funny, but most people they don't want to go to jury. I don't want to do it. It's horrible. And then there are people who really want to go. And the people who really want to go, it's an odd group of individuals. And I've been to quite a few jury trials. I've said, as the investigating officer for a lot of them, it is a mixed bag. And when you sit through jury selection and you're kind of just like, wow, this is truly a mixed bag of society. And now this person's life is potentially in their hands. So if there was an answer, it really goes back to being able to articulate exactly what you did. And if you can't, that's okay. And then identify the mistakes you made. Don't hide things. Don't try to cover it up. If you made a mistake, it's fine. Don't hide the mistake. The defense attorneys are going to love that. So, it's a game, but this goes back to the kind of the age-old question of, why am I doing this? Why am I here? And what is the outcome? And what's a reasonable person going to take away from this? Or what are they going to see when we see the same? If we watched body camera footage today, I could show it to you. We could go to someone on the street and
we're all seeing different stuff.
Yeah, right? You're all going to see a different version of it. So it's tough, man. I have a lot of patience for the new guys, but it comes down to self-exposure. Don't be afraid and don't pretend. Like I always tell people.
That's an interesting word.
What? Pretend? Oh yeah. There's a lot of cops who, has anyone done this before? Oh yeah. And they're in their mind, they go, I don't know what that is. Well, don't say that. Say you haven't done it before and learn. I love hearing someone say, hey, I've never done that before. You go, cool, man. Like, you want to go bang out this search warrant? We'll do it together. I will help you, or you can watch me do it. And nobody wants to say, I don't know, or I never have, because it just makes you look stupid. But you're not stupid. Half the room hasn't done
just
that.
Inexperienced.
Yeah. And just say something. So education is huge, and intentionally going to calls that you haven't done, even if they're foreign to you. I mean, it's scary till you do it, right? I mean, I'm a detective now, but on a patrol level, you don't do a lot of search warrants, if any. I mean, it's, and I shouldn't say that for every county or city, but we don't. Most people don't. But then it comes down to the small things, like, you have a child molest on a patrol level, you just kind of go, oh God, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And usually it's not, you won't even have to do very much, because most agencies now, it's a minimal facts interview. It's very little, but don't short stroke yourself by avoiding things and hiding. Like, just go do it, do the work. And I'll just say this too. It's an issue right now with the newer generation. When I became a cop, I didn't really care about, like, it wasn't a social thing. I wanted to go change the world, and little did I know I never would, but I could try. And I had this drive to go out and do good and do the cop work, get my hands dirty, and just like go out and fight crime. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to help people too, more than anything. It was probably less crime, more just like helping society. That's my big thing. But now we see a lot of younger, cops that it's more of like a a social thing and less about the work. So they get the uniform, they get the pictures, they get the social media. And then when it comes time to like doing the work, like you can go on someone's Instagram and it's just like, good God, it looks like someone barfed thin blue line shit all over the place. Yep. And then all these uniform pictures. And then you go pull their stats for the year. What did you do? What did you do aside from, and I'll be really, really critical of that because I don't really like those cops. Like, I don't care that this is something that was important to you. We all have work to do. So either you're here for the right reasons or you're here for the wrong reasons. And be proud of what you do. I'm not saying you can't do that and share your experiences.
Yeah, but what are you doing?
Exactly. So, it's some of the most like social media prevalent cops out there. I mean, I'm not gonna say they all are the same, but it's just kind of interesting that most of them aren't even cops anymore. There's quite a few that I've seen over the years that were like, hey, I'm all, and then now they just don't do it anymore because reality set in or it wasn't part of what they thought it was going to be.
They got exposed.
Yeah. So on that note, I mean, do the work. You'll thank yourself later. You'll be a better asset to yourself. And then you'll just be it's not the job. Like my personality, my mindset, all the things that I've learned over the years has made me a better person, not a better cop. I'm a better dad. I'm a better husband. I'm a better member of society. I'm a prepared member of society. I have all this stuff that I can look back on and even though they were really horrible and fucked up, I'm a better person because of it. And I like that. And I can instill that in my kids and my wife. And I guarantee you my kids are being raised differently than most of society because of what I've seen. And it's just a really weird concept, but I couldn't be more grateful of all the horrible shit that I've seen that created this mindset for me. I really can't. I mean,
that is the Zen Cop right there.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And that's the one I want showing up, right? I mean, I can't imagine that all of those things don't also make you a better cop.
They do.
Right? When you show up because you have other things that are bigger than the job to you. So when you're making decisions, you're thinking through things and you're enforcing the law, investigating things, talking to people, victims, suspects, whatever else, all that stuff comes into play. And I think that's the Zen Cop that I have sort of begun to understand a little bit better and why I wanted to talk to you, man, because it seems like there's a big missing piece there. I really like how you highlighted the doing the work versus being recognized for the work. Yeah. Like what achievements are we actually looking for here? And again, this goes back to my whole question on value. What do you actually value here? Do you value just being able to talk about it? Or do you value the work that you're doing? The best cops I know don't talk about it that much publicly. They'll talk about it within their team, or if you talk to them, you ask them, they're going to talk to you about it. Yeah. But it's not the first thing they're thinking about putting it out there. It's what I do. It's the job, so I get it done. There's a fine line, I think, between getting completely consumed by that. At least that's been my experience. And if we go back to the mental health piece, and that consuming doesn't necessarily mean it's just the job. It just means you're putting more time into that and less time into yourself, being a dad, right? And being a good person, being a good human, all those things, and being there and all showing up in all those other kind of ways. So you can also show up here and be that guy. And
it's never too late to change. Like that's the one thing I'll tell people is you can change that overnight. You can change your mindset and,
it's got to start somewhere.
It does. And to your point though, like, do we need to be told thank you? No, but it does help to be recognized. It does help for admin to say, hey, good job. Like the small things you can do. Because sometimes you kind of go, man, like, is anything I'm doing really making a difference? And internally, like I can't stress this enough, that internal administration issues, like talk to your team, if it's a memo or it's something, because they'll keep track of all the shit you do bad. But very seldom do you see someone saying, hey, here's a memo for this. We're watching. Cool. And that's internal. So to everyone who's listening, you don't have to be a sergeant or supervisor. You can see something on a call and write up a memo, send it to your sergeant saying, hey, I saw Joe do this today. It was pretty cool.
Great advice.
Blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's just small things.
Great advice. Looking out for one another that way. Man, that's the stuff I really wanted to hear about. And again, there's some nuance. There's a lot of nuance in that. A lot of things that probably people don't think about on a daily basis. And I'll go back to what you said about, your initial process and writing and putting out the blog and then ultimately the podcast and what you're doing on social media and the time and the effort that you put into it is something that inspires me because I know how, you've just gone through how busy you are. We talked offline about, the things that are going on in your life as well. Like really is a passion project. It's all coming from the right place. And going back to something you said before about like, I want to believe that most cops get into the job because they want to help people. Right.
A lot of them do.
Right. Yeah. And so I would like to think that the greater majority of that's why they're there. And somewhere in there, things get a little bit lost or a little bit misplaced. Energies get misplaced. And then things happen that are within their control and outside their control. And so that's what I like about the content that you put out there, because it really brings things back to examining things a little bit at a different level and just thinking maybe a little bit different about how you're approaching situations, but also for the person that's inexperienced, man, I think what you're bringing to the table is amazing, because you bring in, again, they probably didn't teach you this in the academy. And if you're 3 years on, 5 years on, whatever, you probably haven't learned this yet, but you're gonna at some point. You don't want to learn it this way. Be prepared when it happens, like you were saying. Be confident when it happens. Don't be afraid. And it just seems, again, going back to a lot of the things that we see and hear about, it seems people are afraid. And you're certainly not that guy. But at the same time, you're not up there on a mountain shouting from the rooftop trying to cram it down people's throats. And I think that is, whether it's like that Instagram page or however you're taking your approach, not yours, but that's whoever that's not a cop anymore and is in. Why, dude? Why are you doing it that way? And let the people come to you. And if you say it in the right kind of way and you do it with the right intentions, I think people end up coming there. Yeah. And that's how they find you. Mm-hmm. And to your point about the guy that came to you and said, hey, man, that was a great job on that blog post you put out. And you being surprised that anybody even read that. Yeah. That could be the catalyst for that person, right? To start doing the things when they are acknowledged by somebody, right? That quote unquote matters or doesn't matter, right? Like whether it's administration or whether it's just that guy, that other guy on the beat, right? Who just said, hey, somebody needs to acknowledge this dude did a freaking great job today on this. Or, I learned a lot from him in this particular situation, and how much mileage that can get you, out of people, whether it's a senior dude or a young person, young.
Find teachers in that. Like that's the locate people who can motivate you. I mean, I do my own thing, but I have my, pillars of guys that I look up to, that whether it's on social media or in person, I always try to find, I'm always learning. So don't discount yourself. The day that you think that you figured it out, you failed, and you can't think that way. Like you have to just keep learning and going and always have a master. Don't ever think that this is as good as it'll get. And on the side note of that too is, don't assume that there's going to be something better, because people always talk about, well, I want this. Well, your dream reality may be today. This may be as good as it gets. So don't, foreshadow these unrealistic expectations that may never come, whether that's personally or within the career. Just, that's my advice.
Great advice. I'll say this and kind of what I said there, and just to come over the top, and that is like, and don't be disingenuous about it. And I don't get an ounce of that from you.
Thank you.
And anything that you brought to the table is, if you're seeking attention, that's probably the wrong reason. Yeah. Right. If again, when we go back to intention, so again, complimenting somebody or putting something out there, like don't be disingenuous about it, because there's people have a real nose for that shit now, and they'll smell it on you, and that ruins any credibility, whether you were trying to do something, the right way or not. Like, be careful about that. I've seen too much of that going back. There's plenty of cop shit out there, right? There's plenty of that stuff out there. Find a different way. I think you've been a really great example. I actually asked Eric Tung when he was on my show a couple weeks back, and that was like, what advice could you give somebody about somebody who is looking to maybe have a little bit more of a voice or start these conversations? You started with the blog, like again, like people that are talking aren't necessarily cops anymore. I find that sometimes it's silent, out there, and that people are just like, I probably shouldn't say anything because I don't want to be on the radar here. I want to kind of play it safe or whatever. What advice could you give them about, trying to get stuff out?
If it's something you want to do it. Just, maybe start with intention. Like, why am I doing this? Vision boards are really helpful. You just sort of have an internal one in your head of what I want to accomplish and what do I want to do. And if it's for the right reasons, it'll happen. It's case by case. So if you have a desire, I had no interest in this until I had a really weird experience. And that was my introduction of my calling. And, it's strange how that happened. If you talked to me 4 years ago, I'm not a public person. I'm really private. So this is way out of my wheelhouse, but I kept going because one, it made me feel better. So that was all that. Primarily, that's it. Like, it makes me feel good. I'm trying to make a difference, whether it's writing or whatever. Like, that's my passion. And if someone digs it, great. But then I started seeing that it had an impact on other people. And after going through my own experience, I've had quite a few people, both at work and not at work, talk about their own experience and how it helped. And that's just kind of, if you think you can, you should, great, do it. And then just kind of see where it takes you, if you want to. And don't let anyone, like, that's the one thing I'll say about anything like this, is that there's always going to be someone who's going to have a problem or, be an idiot or whatever. And it's funny because on social media, one of the things that I like doing, and not with intention to be funny, is like, I'll purposely like start, like, not the psychos or the weirdos, not the trolls, but people who have something to say. I'll talk to them. Like, and I'll say, like, and it's not to be like, I'm not challenging. I want to hear why you don't like, okay, cool. Well, I had this experience. This cool, man. Well, I'm sorry you had that experience, but and sometimes it's agree to disagree, but conversation is what breeds like moving forward. So if you're willing to,
get into the conversation.
Yeah. And that's really all that is. But you also have to understand that, just because you feel a certain way, and some cops are really like this is the way. No, it's not. And so you really have to be fluid, whether that's, politically or whatever. You don't have to agree, but listening is so important. And to go back to where we are like now politically, or anything that involves an emotional topic, it's almost impossible to have a conversation. So if you're pursuing this by any means, great. My advice would be, don't be so, focused on this one thing. And you can totally disagree with someone and you can have a conversation. Like there are people in history that are, relentlessly horrible that if I had the ability, I would love to sit down and talk to them. Doesn't mean I support what they were doing, but I want to know, like, the most recent thing with the shooter in New York, I'm glad that he was taken alive because I'm curious. I want to know, even if it's psychobabble, I'm curious. I mean, Ted Kaczynski, we can all agree, is a maniac and a bad person. I read his book. I was curious. I wanted to see. So
I was too. That one was so intriguing to me.
Don't be afraid to explore and, listen, more importantly than talk. And I think that's a huge thing, is that people nowadays, we're really, opinion-based, and we want to shove stuff down each other's throats, but don't be afraid to just sit back and have a conversation, a two-way conversation, even if you don't agree. And I think that's my advice. If you're going to try and go down this road and all the weird stuff with social media, just be ready for a lot of people who may not necessarily agree with your mission, but if it's important to you, do it.
That's great advice, man. I appreciate you having this conversation with me. And again, the time that you took out to do it and allow me to go down all those different rabbit holes with you and ultimately come back to that, which is encouraging people to get out there and talk more and have more conversations, particularly with people that are in your line of work that look at it through different lenses. I think it's super important. Again, we've seen a lot of like this similar lens, or maybe one of three lenses that kind of being looked at. And I like how I really enjoy how you are able to kind of zoom out and look at it through different lenses and actually get very microscopic at times when you want to. So I really encourage people to go listen to your stuff, and read your stuff. And one of the things I didn't mention is like, you're really into the art side of things, right? Yeah. And I can tell you're into music as well. That's cool. That's why I come to the internet. Like, what's behind this person? Again, going back to like what makes them tick and stuff. You got some really interesting, cool artwork.
Thank you.
You clearly put a lot of time into how you present your stuff. And I think that's like I've learned a few things actually, just kind of going through there. So thanks for that too. I appreciate it.
It's awesome.
So look, man, real quick, I'll let you sign off here. So where do people find you? How do they get to know you more? If they want to reach out, what do they do?
The Zen Cop on Instagram. I only have Instagram, no Facebook. I have a YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple. The podcast is kind of when I have time. So the first season, I really just got through it to get through it, got my feet wet. Season 2 is pretty cool. I got to go talked to a lot of neat people. Time-wise, though, that was kind of stressing me out. So I probably do an episode every like couple months now.
Okay.
I'm pretty selective. Season 3, my end goal is going to be doing face-to-face. So it's digital right now.
Yep. It's a big undertaking.
It is. It's a lot. So balancing that out with work. I mean, family always wins, but in a particular order, family, work, this stuff. So I'm the only one who does all this. I self-produce everything. So it's just me. So if you want to be on the show, zencop@gmail.com or find me on social media. I love having people in the hopper for guests and stuff. The blog is my passion. The website, it's again, like done. So I'm in the process of getting a new website and hopefully some stuff for sale pretty soon. I showed you the little scorpion thing that I made. That small stuff, but
got some cool products.
I really like keeping myself busy with my hands. So that's something that's fun. I highly recommend for anyone, not just cop stuff, but find a hobby. But yeah, you can find me on there. I'm a one-man show. If you don't hear from me for a couple of days or a week, it's not personal. I just I leave it to like Saturday mornings and Mondays for me to do my stuff. But
good to know.
My plans for the future, I mentioned the therapy thing. I'm always writing. I'd love to publish a book one day. I do a lot of poetry. You can see some of that on the Instagram. But yeah, I'm excited, and I don't really have like a shelf life or anything. One day, if I don't like it anymore, I'll just walk away and disappear. And
I love that.
I'll be fine with it. But for now, this is what it is.
Well, you're doing a great job with it, man. And
Thank
like
you.
I said, I appreciate you. I know this thing will reach, this will reach a few people. You mentioned something at the beginning, like, again, going back to the blog, like, oh shit, somebody actually read that thing? That's the same thing here. So I'll give a plug to you on this. And it's like, look, the podcast world, blog world's a little weird. It's very tough to get feedback, right? Instagram's a little easier, but it's kind of also weird.
It is.
In terms of what kind of feedback you're getting and what does it actually mean. So make sure you go to this guy's page, give him a follow.
Thank you.
Like his stuff, comment, get into conversation with this guy because he wants to have the conversations. Yeah, so go check him out, the Zen Cop on Instagram, and then you can hear him on all the major platforms. Thanks again, man. I appreciate you, Mac.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.